You're listening to Uptown Radio. It's February 14th, 2020. I'm Sarah Gelbard.
And I'm Brett Forrest.
Legal challenges are mounting against New York's elimination of cash bail.
This is a Jim Crow-style rollback, and that we are definitely moving in the wrong direction.
The 2020 census is underway. Activists want all New Yorkers to be counted.
So I know the neighborhood, and I know the people, and I want them to be counted.
A popular alternative to spotty bus service is under threat.
The craziest thing about the vans is that they all operate illegally.
And this Black History Month, hearing from Afro-Latino voices.
There's a recognition that our battles are not separate, right? They're all entangled, and we can only learn from each other, right? And so I think that's what the future holds.
Plus, it's the one-year anniversary of Amazon's messy divorce with Long Island City.
All that and more on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The U.S. has a deal with the Taliban to reduce violence for a week. That could pave the way for real peace talks and a reduction of U.S. forces in Afghanistan. Here's NPR's Michelle Kellerman.
The plan is to have a week-long reduction of violence before the U.S. and the Taliban sign any deal on a U.S. troop reduction. After this period of calm, the Taliban would also have to enter into peace talks with Afghan officials and civic leaders. Administration officials, who asked not to be named, say they have an agreement on the reduction of violence. One top official described it as, quote, very specific and said it covers all of Afghanistan. Another official told reporters at a security conference in Munich that the U.S. military will be monitoring this closely and has the authority for self-defense. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, Washington.
President Trump is ignoring Attorney General William Barr's request to stop tweeting about the Justice Department. Earlier this week, Trump criticized federal prosecutors for recommending 7 to 9 years in prison for ally Roger Stone. The Justice Department then took the unusual step of overruling the prosecutors, who ended up resigning from the case. NPR's Tamara Keith reports Trump insists he did not tell Barr what to do, but could have if he wanted to.
President Trump has commented repeatedly in recent days about the case of his longtime associate Roger Stone, who will be sentenced next week for lying to Congress and intimidating a witness, among other crimes. Thursday, in an interview with ABC News, the Attorney General Bill Barr said it was making his job impossible and told Trump to cut it out.
It's time to stop the tweeting about Department of Justice criminal cases.
In response, this morning, Trump tweeted, quoting Barr from another part of the interview, where Barr said Trump had never personally asked him to do anything in a criminal case. Trump then added, quote, this doesn't mean that I do not have, as president, the legal right to do so. I do, but I have so far chosen not to. Tamara Keith, NPR News.
China is now reporting that nearly 64,000 people have been infected with the new coronavirus, among them more than 1,700 healthcare workers. Here's NPR's Ping Huang.
The World Health Organization says the data from China show that infection rates among healthcare workers peaked in the 3rd and 4th weeks of January and have dropped off in the past 2 weeks. In a press conference, the WHO says they're looking for more information about the timing and circumstances around how health workers got sick. Mike Ryan directs the WHO's Health Emergencies Program.
We also need to look at how many of those health workers were exposed unknowingly within a clinical environment, how many were wearing protective equipment, how many had training. There's a whole load of factors we need to look at.
The WHO is sending a team of international experts to China, and they're expected to arrive this weekend. Ping Huang, NPR News.
From Washington, this is NPR News.
For Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Kira Long. A Manhattan jury this afternoon found lawyer Michael Avenatti guilty of extortion in a case brought by sportswear giant Nike. Avenatti, who gained fame representing porn star Stormy Daniels against President Donald Trump, threatened to use his media access to tarnish Nike's reputation unless the company paid him up to $25 million. He could face up to 20 years in prison. Prosecutors in the trial against movie mogul Harvey Weinstein presented their closing arguments in New York's courts today, in a landmark case for the Me Too movement. Prosecutors say Weinstein saw the women as disposable and counted on them never coming forwards, while Weinstein's lawyers yesterday called prosecution overzealous. Weinstein faces 5 charges, including rape and sexual assault. Jurors will begin deliberating on the verdict next week. ICE arrested a man believed to be a member of the MS-13 gang this morning in connection to what investigators believe are credible threats to NYPD officers in the Bronx. The NYPD is already on high alert after a man walked into the 41st precinct last weekend and shot at officers, injuring 2. Pat Lynch, president of the New York Police Benevolent Association, said on Monday that the NYPD needs more public support.
We need support from the citizens, and we need support from our elected officials.
Bankrupt department store Barney's announced today that it will close all stores by February 23rd. The 97-year-old luxury department store has struggled to keep up in a fast-changing retail environment. In sports, the New York Rangers will take on the Columbus Blue Jackets tonight in Madison Square Gardens at 7 p.m. And if you're heading towards Yonkers or Albany when you leave the office this evening, you could face some delays. That's due to an Amtrak train which derailed around 11 p.m. last night in a tunnel leading up to Penn Station. The track's now been restored, but trains are still running behind. Weather-wise, it's going to stay sunny for most of the weekend, with temperatures expected to hover around 30 degrees on Saturday. Sunday will be warmer, with reaching around the mid-40s. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Kara Long.
In a few weeks, every household in the country will be mailed a census form. Each form looks like a simple postcard, but when added together, the results will impact everything from congressional seats to federal funding. Compared to the rest of the country, far fewer New Yorkers complete the forms, especially among immigrant communities. And the U.S. Census Bureau recently predicted New York City's response rate this year will be even lower than the last census. Megan Cattell reports on a citywide campaign to try to fix that.
When Fadia Muhammad talks to people in Corona about the census, they're usually hesitant. She works with Common Point Queens, a social services nonprofit.
A lot of people are afraid that the census is going to share this information with La Migra, ICE, especially with this administration. It's one of the biggest fears that people have in filling out the census.
Corona is a neighborhood with a very big Latin American community and has one of the lowest response rates in all of New York State. Muhammad says many residents worry the information could be used by the government to check everything from immigration status to whether their housing situation is legal. So many don't send the forms back. That's a big problem for the neighborhood and for the city, says Amy Vertal. She's the community grants manager for Complete the Count, a campaign created by the mayor's office to raise census awareness in undercounted communities.
The two biggest issues at stake are really in representation. So congressional seats are determined directly by the census. And then also resources that come to our city. So a lot of different programs are either completely federally funded or have some portion of their funding which comes from the federal funding.
Earlier this week, Complete the Count hosted workshops to train community groups and ensure that the census is confidential.
So welcome everyone to the workshop on the census. Today we're doing...
That's Antonio Alarcon. He presented at Alianza Ecuatoriana, a community center in Corona.
They will never ask you for a social security number. They will never ask you for your credit card, for like a statement of your bank. All the employees that work for the Census Bureau are sworn to protect your confidentiality for life.
Saul Reyes was one of the census volunteers at the workshop. He said it motivated him to make sure Corona gets an accurate count.
So I know the neighborhood, and I know the people, and I want them to be counted because we're not going to lose any more representatives in the House of Representatives. No more. No more. We're going to stop that.
Another attendee was Julio Rosales. He's from Guatemala, but he's lived in Corona for the last 7 years. He was curious about the census and how to participate while maintaining his privacy.
Lo específico es de que cuando las personas le preguntan a uno.
The specific question I have is, when people come and ask questions, you want to know if they're part of ICE. But I know that's not how it is. And to make sure people aren't afraid, we'd want them to inform us that they're different, that they're just here for the census.
After attending the workshop, Julio says he'll be sending back his census form.
Sí, claro que sí.
Megan Cattell, Columbia Radio News.
Last April, New York State voted to eliminate cash bail for most nonviolent crimes, like jumping a turnstile or trespassing. The hope was to reform the justice system so the amount of money you had on hand didn't determine whether you went to jail. But since the law went into effect on January 1st, there's been a major outcry from lawmakers and police who say that people being released from jail pose a danger to the public. Anya Schultz has the story.
It's only been 6 weeks since cash bail reforms went into effect, and already the state's jail population has dropped by over a quarter. 6,000 fewer New Yorkers behind bars than this time last year. Derek Kane is with the Brooklyn Community Bail Fund, a nonprofit that used to help people afford their bail.
Now people don't have to go to jail, so they don't have to deal with collateral consequences of losing their jobs, losing their children, losing their apartment.
Kane says before the reforms, you could only get out of jail before trial if you could afford bail. If you were poor, you were stuck.
One day of incarceration is enough trauma to sort of like unsettle someone for the rest of their life.
But just weeks after the new rules went into effect, New York City Police Commissioner Shea blamed a January crime spike on bail reform. And last week, a crowd of cops in uniforms, prosecutors, and Republican politicians in suits rallied in Albany to criticize the new law, including Republican Senator John Flanagan from Long Island.
You are less safe today than you were a year ago. There are people out on release who never should have been released or should have been given bail.
Some Democrats are also concerned. Representatives from Long Island, where local press highlighted crimes committed by those released without bail, have their own plan. For nonviolent crimes, they want a judge to determine who gets released before trial. But other Democrats disagree. And so, yet another rally was held in the state capitol on Wednesday.
Leave our bail reform intact. We will not accept rollbacks. Leave our bail reform intact. We will not accept.
Assemblymember Tremaine Wright from Brooklyn said putting judges in charge is a step back.
This is a Jim Crow style rollback, and that we are definitely moving in the wrong direction. There is no way on earth that we can stand here with our heads held high and say that we are now going to allow judges to have formalized ways to use bias and discretion, which really means discrimination.
All this debate is occurring just 44 days after the new law has taken effect. Lauren Jones from the Vera Institute, a criminal justice research organization, says for data to be used effectively, we need more of it.
I'm a Mets fan, and as any Mets fan knows, if you look at just the first 3 weeks of a season, that unfortunately doesn't predict how the team's going to do for the year.
But she says what we can do is look at states like New Jersey. It ended cash bail 3 years ago. And since then, she says, the state's crime rate has dropped by 30%. Anya Schultz, Columbia Radio News.
Today is National Organ Donor Day, and New York State has one of the lowest rates of organ donor registration in the country. Dr. Allison Fox is a liver transplant specialist and director of the Living Donor Program at New York Presbyterian. She says 16,000 patients are on the liver transplant list at any given time, and only 6,000 to 7,000 transplants are performed each year. The rest of them wait, and many die while they're waiting. But Dr. Fox has noticed a trend. Many more people are signing up to donate their organs to strangers. She calls this altruistic organ donation.
Our center has recently started to see a big rise in altruistic donors, so people who hear about somebody needing a transplant on, some kind of social media platform or whatever, and they kind of step forward and say, hey, I don't know this person, from anybody, but I'm in a position where I can help, and I'm healthy, and I want to give a piece of my liver to whoever you guys think needs it most. And we've seen a big uptrend in that over the last 2 years. And at first we were hesitant to take on altruistic donors, but it has become an important organ pool for our patients. And I think we've done a very good job taking care of the donors in this situation, because they do have special needs, considering they're not doing this for a loved one. They're just doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. Social media has played kind of a big part in this. I think that people getting their stories out there on all these platforms has increased awareness about the fact that you can, most people know, I have 2 kidneys, I can donate a kidney, but people don't know that live liver donation is even like a thing that's done. The ability to spread information in a more rapid way across, the internet is, one contributor. I think people sharing their stories on platforms like Facebook or whatever, saying, my husband, my wife, my sibling is, dying of liver disease, and none of our family members are blood matches or compatible blood types, or none of us are eligible to donate. We just need help. People hear those stories and they want to be involved and they want to help if they can. The other thing is, a lot of centers have really started kind of advertising the idea of living donation more, which is, I think, overall, the net effect of those things has led to a rise in the number of people who are coming forward to be evaluated as potential live donors.
Okay. And have you seen any significant issues in New York City in recent years that have hurt organ transplants? Any problems that come from low level of donor registration?
New York is like the number 50, I think, of all the states in terms of rates of organ donation.
Why do you think that is?
The system has been a little bit broken, but I also think that there is a lot of stigma around organ donation, especially, New York being such a diverse place. People come here from around the world and have, reservations about, signing the back of their license or whatever. And I also think that as a state, New York has not been, as proactive as it could about increasing organ donation. But I think that there's a concerted effort to make things like that happen.
Can you tell our listeners how people can register to donate an organ?
They can register when they apply for their license to become, an organ donor. They can also go online and register.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the work you do.
Take care. Thank you.
It's Black History Month, and across the U.S., students are learning about icons like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Jackie Robinson. But what about Cuban salsa queen Celia Cruz or Puerto Rican historian Arturo Schomburg? Black History Month has long been focused on the contributions of African Americans, which often makes Afro-Latinos feel excluded. Students and professors at City College think that should change. Jamaris Perez reports on how they're including Afro-Latino students as part of their Black History Month celebrations this year.
About 10 students at City College sat around tables blowing up purple balloons on Thursday night. Not for a party, but as the base for the Dominican carnival mask they're making.
We tried to get something to roll pizza dough, but we didn't find that, so we got candles instead so we could roll out the clay. We got balloons so that they can put the clay and mold it to a face-like shape.
This mask-making event is one example of how City College is including Afro-Latinos in their Black History Month programming. Next week, they'll celebrate Dominican Independence Day in the Academic Center's Rotunda. Mariah Ramirez is president of the Dominican Students Association, and she's so excited about the event, she breaks out into Spanish while describing it.
So that's a whole 2 hours that we will have our music, we'll sell our food, we will have a traditional dance, but also merengue and bachata y cosas así. Sorry, that was my fault.
Ramirez says it's important to include Afro-Latino culture in Black History Month to combat the idea that people in the Latinx community haven't embraced their blackness.
There's a stereotype that Dominicans don't think that they're black, and I've heard it a lot. That's just a misconception, and it's a lot of older heads that feel like that.
Ramirez says in her experience, everyone in the Dominican Students Association is proud of their blackness. Fatima Mills is a member of the school's National Council of Negro Women. When I asked her if there was any apprehension towards including Afro-Latinos, she said she could see how the historical stereotype might make some black students skeptical.
It's are you black or do you just like what the black culture is right now and such? So it's a weird place to navigate.
But Mills and other members of black organizations want to be more inclusive of the groups they share their roots with.
We don't really work with each other like that, and that kind of sucks, especially for a lot of people who are part of both groups and they feel like they have to pick one side.
Students shouldn't have to choose between their identities, says Shamari Coleman. She's a senior and member of 2 Black student organizations on campus. She wants her Afro-Latino peers to feel welcome.
No one's going to tell you, no, you're not Black, you don't deserve to be in this space, when you obviously do.
The push to include Afro-Latinos started last year, when Dr. Vanessa Valdez became the director of City College's Black Studies program.
There's a recognition that our battles are not separate, right? They're all entangled, and we can only learn from each other.
But the question of who gets to be a part of Black History Month is as old as the holiday itself. Since National Negro History Week was established in 1926, scholars have debated the definition of Blackness and whether it includes people from non-English speaking countries.
When we think about traditional renderings of Blackness, there is a push for, of course, an emphasis on the United States, but by the same token, there were also people then who were trying to expand it.
Nearly a century later, City College represents the next generation who are continuing to challenge the way we look at Blackness. Jamaris Perez, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come. Stay with us.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Brett Forrest.
And I'm Sarah Gelbard.
Coming up, we revisit Amazon's divorce with Queens 1 year later.
Insurance costs are going up for private van services.
And finally, the City Museum of New York writes a love letter to basketball in the city.
These stories and more coming up. If New York City were to pen a love letter this Valentine's Day to its favorite pastimes, where would it be sent? Maybe to the theaters of Broadway or the museums of the Upper East Side? Will Walkie reports from one museum where a new exhibit showcases one of the most important parts of the city's culture. As you'll soon find out, the ties between the two run as deep as the Hudson River.
The City Museum of New York had a challenge this year. Present a Valentine to a prominent pastime with roots across all 5 boroughs. And what was that new love letter they were displaying? A new exhibit to basketball. Maria Curran-Curtis is a fan of the sport.
New York is basketball. I mean, I think everybody kind of knows it's the Mecca.
The exhibit is called City Game. Though basketball was first invented in Massachusetts in 1891, it came to New York City soon after, and it was love at first sight. The NBA was founded here, and a number of the game's legends call the city home. And like any great love story, the relationship has had its ups and downs. Take the New York Knicks, which some New Yorkers complain have been irrelevant since the 1990s. Curran-Curtis says she appreciates how the museum took care to highlight all communities who love the game. Videos behind her depict WNBA superstars and players in a wheelchair league.
If you want to play basketball, jump right in, jump right on a court, and everybody has the same opportunity, and it has a very good spirit about it.
Viewers here walk into a big open room where memorabilia and photographs are displayed on metal shelves designed to look like bleachers. There's black and white video footage of high school games,
from start to finish.
Snippets of high-intensity streetball games with large crowds,
All 5 of them, everyone!
and footage from the Knicks' glory days, sadly, way over 20 years ago. When hip-hop culture grew in the 80s and 90s, trash-talking streetball culture developed with it in parks all over Harlem and Brooklyn. What's the best way to frame all this history? Jonathan Jackson is one of the designers of City Game.
The viewer of the exhibit is actually in the middle where the performer would be, and the content is where the spectator would be. So it's sort of a flipped perspective in that manner.
Like some long relationships, there's tragedy involved. One video shows footage of the recently deceased Kobe Bryant playing streetball in Harlem. Curran-Curtis says she came to pay respects to her uncle, Jack Curran. He passed away in 2013 and features prominently in a few videos. He coached high school ball in Queens for 55 years, and a number of the game's legends, like Kenny the Jet Smith and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, say they owe some of their success to him. It gets Curran-Curtis choked up to see forgotten patrons of the game like her uncle highlighted.
He was like my father, so, yes. Sorry, I'll get it together in a minute. I'm so happy that this is here.
Valentine's Day may end tonight at midnight, but New York's love letter to basketball is open for the rest of the year. Will Walkie, Columbia Radio News.
Tens of thousands of commuters live in places beyond the reaches of the subway in Brooklyn and Queens. There are buses, but advocacy groups rate them poorly for speed and reliability. So instead, many of these commuters turn to private services known as dollar vans. These vans are often cheaper and faster than taking the bus, but as Tay Glass reports, new regulations that increase insurance costs could drive the dollar van industry to a grinding halt.
Shakira Barnhill is waiting in front of an MTA bus stop in Jamaica, Queens, but she's not waiting for a city bus. She's waiting for a dollar van. A typical dollar van is white, unmarked, and has room for about 20 passengers.
Why would you ride a dollar van compared to the bus?
The dollar vans are more quicker and faster, get to your close destination than a bus.
Steve London has been driving one for about 35 years. But because of a new law that went into effect on New Year's, he might have to find other work. According to a statement from Cuomo, these regulations are meant to make limousines safer after an accident in 2018 killed 20 people. But instead of just affecting limos, the rules apply to all commercial vehicles that hold 8 or more passengers. This could be an expensive problem for dollar van drivers like London.
Right now I'm working 6 days a week just to make sure that my family bills and expenses are covered.
At $2 a ride, dollar vans are already operating on the margins. According to London, he paid about $25,000 for his van insurance last year. This year, he expects to pay $5,000 more.
So, I'm looking at my options of what I will do, whether I stay, whether I go, or how long more I can hold on before I decide to leave.
London and many of his fellow drivers have signed petitions for Cuomo to change the law. Assemblymember Nick Perry from Brooklyn heard about the issue from dollar van drivers in his community, and he says they weren't the only ones complaining.
I have since been contacted by operators of ambulance and school bus operators, so it's quite more extensive than I initially thought.
Now Perry says he's working to reduce the amount of insurance drivers will have to pay. In the meantime, business is tough for dollar van drivers, and they're already skirting with the law.
The craziest thing about the vans is that they all operate illegally.
Eric Goldwyn teaches urban planning at NYU. He says that most dollar vans pick up passengers who hail them on the street. That's illegal in New York City. Street hails are primarily reserved for yellow cabs. Goldwyn says if a driver can't pay their new insurance premium, they may choose to break more of the rules, like driving underinsured. As for passengers, Goldwyn says he understands why they would opt for the vans.
The current conditions under which buses operate in New York City is, very, very, very suboptimal.
Now, dollar van drivers like London have to decide if they will continue or if this is...
For the very last stop.
Cuomo's office did not respond to a request for comment. Tay Glass, Columbia Radio News.
This is Uptown Radio's Stream of Consciousness. Rafaela Molino, singer, songwriter, Crown Heights.
I woke up yesterday with so much anxiety, and I was like, why do I feel this way? Like, this is an awful feeling. And I realized it was because I had a session that day, a writing session. There was definitely a big part of me that thought, I don't know how I wrote all of the songs that I've written in the past, but it's not going to happen again. Whatever came through me that caused me to write those songs, I don't know where it went. And so I'm never going to be able to do it again, and that's all I'm ever going to make. I just have to force myself to go and sit, and we ended up writing a really great song. So yeah, I definitely have to face the imposter syndrome thing very frequently, but it's a good exercise in just going through the motions to confront that and prove that it is not the case.
You're listening to Columbia Radio News. Online, Fridays at 4.
This past Sunday, the film The Neighbor's Window won the Academy Award for Best Live-Action Short. The film is set in New York. It's about an older couple who can see everything their neighbors across the street are doing.
Oh, I can't watch.
Oh, she keeps watching.
But seriously, they need to order some drapes.
It's disgraceful.
I spoke with Brooklyn-based filmmaker Marshall Curry about where he got the inspiration and what it's like to finally win an Oscar after 4 nominations. For those who haven't seen the movie, I asked him what it's about.
It's the story of a woman who is in her late 30s, early 40s maybe, has a few young kids, is a little frustrated with her life as just sort of a mom who's toting kids around and having to get groceries and that sort of stuff, and a little frustrated with her husband. And a young 20-something-year-old couple moves in across the street from her, and she can see into their windows. And they're having sex and having dance parties and living the lives that 20-somethings live. And she develops this kind of rear window obsession with watching them, and then some things happen. So I don't want to spoil it for people.
So being able to see into the lives of your New York City neighbors, I feel like that seems like a common thing people always think about or have seen themselves. But it's my understanding this film was actually inspired by a true story. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's right. So the kernel of it came from a story that I heard on a podcast called Uptown Radio. It was later rebroadcast on Radio Lab, but a woman named Diane Weipert told a story on that show about having a young couple move in across the street from her, and her becoming obsessed with watching them. The story is called The Living Room. Years later, when I was trying to come up with an idea of something, it popped into my head, and it was really fun because the woman Diane ended up coming to the Oscars with us. We got an extra ticket, so she joined us at the Oscars, and we had a lot of fun.
And just out of curiosity, would you say any part of the film is inspired by anything you've personally experienced?
Yeah, I haven't. I didn't have that specific experience, but I've definitely, lived in New York for years and years. So we pretty much everybody has a story about seeing into a neighbor's window and having, imagining what their lives are like. One of the things that's been kind of interesting is that, in some ways it's a very New York story because we live so close to each other. And but a lot of people who don't live in New York have said that they've seen it as sort of an allegory for social media, where we get these glimpses into other people's lives that are intimate, that feel intimate, and yet are incomplete. I hope, anyway, that the story transcends beyond just New York.
Now, let's just talk about the Oscars. You've been nominated 4 times before, including this one. And so was there anything different this time? I mean, what were you thinking right before they announced the name of the film?
I was super nervous. I had thought about what I was going to say if I happened to have our film win. But I was pretty nervous about being able to get up there and say it. And it's fun, the whole event is a little bit absurd, and it's all these people playing dress up in hopes of winning a little gold statue that has no value except for the light that it can shine on our film.
Now you have won your Oscar, and a lot of people would consider that the pinnacle of a film career, but what's next for you?
Hopefully I'll be able to just keep working. That's the thing that I love the most. I just like shooting and editing and making films. The best case scenario for me is that it helps me to be able to keep doing the thing I love.
Marshall, thanks so much for joining us. And again, congratulations on your Oscar.
Thank you so much.
If you want to watch the film, you can check it out on theneighborswindow.com.
Well, that does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our foreman today was executive producer Lucas Woods. Leading our staff of reporters were senior producers Emily Pizzacreta and editor Asim Shukla. Our assistant editor was Jamaris Perez.
Director Lauren Peace coordinated our studio production with Tay Glass and Anya Schultz.
Our web producer Megan Cattell got this stream live to the web. Kiara Long produced the news.
Our instructors Sally Herships, Ben Shapiro, Tracy Samuelson, and Camille Peterson advised our staff. I'm Sarah Gelbard.
And I'm Brett Forrest. Uptown Radio is live on Fridays at 4. Until next time, you can always find us on uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening and happy Valentine's Day.